Hello, everyone. My name is LBK, and this is King Pair Podcast. Should we start with the Asia Cup?
Okay.
And as far as the Asia Cup goes, I think the first thing that everyone saw and everyone loved was the Pacers from UAE, especially someone named Mahika Gaur and Vaishnavi Mahesh, if that's the name. And I think uh, knowing that you and I belong to the subcontinent, I think we are already acquainted with the quality of left-handed bowling, in previous years. And now there's Mahika Gaur, who I thought bowled those Yorkers against Sri Lanka really well. So take me through her. What kind of bowler she is, and how have you seen her in the past, and her journey till now.
So she's been a reasonably important part of the UAE's rise up through the ranks of the T20 circuit, not of the T20 international circuit. She's already played 18 games and only 16, which is quite a bit for her age. Um, yeah, like she played most of those games in the UAE's 20 plus whatever match win streak they had over 2021-22. And this is her first chance to really get to play with some of the top teams out there. She was also at the U19 qualifiers where the UE just pretty much destroyed everyone else, and to qualify for the U19 Women's World Cup. She did miss the World Cup qualifiers, but now she's back for the Asia Cup, and yeah, she's doing quite well for herself here. And again, like she's only 16, has a pretty bright future ahead of her if she's able to stay in the Emirates after she finishes high school. Because that's another big thing that I think we've talked about in the past about the men's team as well. The big problem for UAE now, they're developing a bunch of really solid youth players because they have a very strong academy system. But the problem is keeping them after they finish high school because most the universities in the UAE aren't very good, and it's still very much a South Asian parents' mindset, right, where you have to go to university and then you get a job, right? So most students will choose to go overseas for university, and that makes it very difficult for them to play for the UAE. They're still eligible for UAE. It's actually like a provision within the ICC's rules that if you go overseas for higher education, your residency period pauses. Um, so like, to be eligible for a country, you need to live within that country for three of the previous 5 years, I think. And if you go overseas to university, that pauses. So you're still eligible until you finish university. After that, the pausing period stops and you have to return to the country if you want to remain eligible. But yeah, that's the big bottleneck for a lot of UAE's talents going forward. But on the men's team, at least, there's been a lot of talk of how a lot of the players are now picking universities within the UAE to stay in the UAE so they can continue playing for the national side. And it will be interesting to see if the same happens with the women's team because they're not they don't get the same contracts as the men's teams. They don't get the same um, opportunities, right? Because there's no women's UAE T20 league yet, unlike the men. But if they get in there early, they might be able to make that happen quicker. But it's going to be a very big decision for a lot of these players coming up in the next few years. Is how do they tackle higher education, and are they going to commit to staying in the UE, or are they going to have to take a break from cricket?
And talking about the other pacer, first of all, beg your pardon, it is not actually Vaishnavi Mahesh, she's a leggy. It is Khushi Sharma who is the other pacer. And it is interesting that you bring up the point of them staying in UAE after completing their school, because Khushi Sharma is 20, I think, and she, obviously that means she has stayed in UAE. So I think your question is somewhat answered almost here only, that I think the Pacers are willing to stay in UAE, I assume. I mean, if they are playing for UAE, I would assume that they are living in UAE as well, living or studying, whatever it goes. But I mean, how how does this whole process go? I mean, as far as cricket development in UAE goes, I mean, maybe these pacers, spinners, or even the batters. I mean, what is the grassroots level in the UAE for women's cricket right now?
So most of the grassroots in the UAE is just in the cricket academy system. Right there's ICC Academy. There's Zayed Cricket Academy, which is next to the Sheikh Zayed Stadium in Abu Dhabi. There's a ton of other academies all throughout the country. Um, so most of them started off as just men's academies, but over the last 5-ish years, they've been really encouraging. There's been a real encouragement to try and get more women into the setup, more girls into the setup. So, like, I moved out of the UAE in 2019, and I was at a cricket academy when I was there. And as I left, like, they were really, on all the advertisements for the academy on, that you'd see on the billboards or that you'd see on the social medias. It was mainly about your daughters can come here too, so you should enroll them too. It's not only for your sons, and that's sort of how it went across the country. And um, cricket was something that people could play during COVID, so I feel like that probably did help quite a bit with getting. Yeah, so most of the UAE's grassroots kids, they come from the academy system, and over the last 5 or so years, there's been a real conscious effort to get more girls into the system. In the past, most of these academies have mainly just been for boys. That's how it was for pretty much the entire time I was there. But I left in 2019, and over that late 2018, early 2019 period, for most of the ads you'd see, there was a real effort on them to get the point across that your girls or your daughters are welcome here too, not just your sons. And in that last year, I did play a little bit with some girls that had enrolled, and yeah, that was the case across the country. And we're starting to see that now, 3 years after, and the whole COVID period where the UAE wasn't that affected by COVID in general beyond like the first 3 or so months. So pretty much after that, the cricket academies reopened and everyone went back to playing. So that was probably a real big benefit as well for a lot of these kids. And just like widening your talent pool, the UAE started to do that with their women's team, which was pretty much I don't know 11 volunteers, I guess, uh, before 2020. And yeah, we're seeing the effects now, right? They're way ahead of anyone in their at their regional level in Asia. They're way ahead of anyone else. It's only once they break out a regional level and they start to play Thailand, Papua New Guinea, Scotland, Zimbabwe that they run into teams that they struggle against. But they're only going to get better by playing teams that are better than them, and they're starting to do that now. And yeah, they've run some of the teams quite close. They beat Zimbabwe at the World Cup qualifier. They've definitely put on a respectable showing at this Asia Cup so far, and they did beat Malaysia as well to show that there's still some distance between them and the teams they've left behind. And yeah, like if other players can follow what Khushi Sharma's done, and I assume she goes to one of the universities in the UAE. If their other teenage players follow that, then yeah, it's a really strong core, and if they keep adding to it, they could become a real force in the women's game going forward. I don't want to make too many assumptions because I don't actually know the people personally. I haven't, I don't think Paul Radley, who's the main UAE cricket journalist that's done in-depth profiles on them. But if I had to assume, I would think it's because if they're newcomers coming into the academy, they're not going to be able to bat as much. It, like at least in my academy, right? If you were known to be a good batter, you'd get more time to bat in the nets, and you'd sort of have to work your way up to get that more time in the nets. So if they're new players coming in, then what they start to do at first, especially if they're playing against boys, because I don't think there would have been enough women for only enough girls for only women's sessions when they're starting out, is just to bowl. So if they start bowling, and if they're playing against boys, then and they're only bowling, they'll get better at bowling. And also, as well, most academies, no one wants to bowl spin. Everyone's bowling quick, so they probably follow that too. And in the end, if you practice fast bowling a lot and you discover you're quite good at it, you'll keep bowling quick. And I think that's probably what happened here.
And talking about the other team that has surprised a bit, that is Thailand. And I think everyone remembers that game from the 2020 T20 World Cup, them against Pakistan, where they scored 150 for three, but couldn't win the game because it was washed out. But seemed like they finally made up for that. I mean, looks like this was a really good game, and they really outplayed Pakistan, especially with the bowling. And I mean, they do not have a lot of you know quality batters, but the one they have kind of did her job, and that she did it really well. I mean, after all, she's the 14th ranked T20 batter in the world. Natakan Chantham, I think that is her name. And how have you seen? I mean, this team has developed pretty rapidly in last 3 or 4 years. So how did it come to that? I mean, how has Thailand progressed to this point?
Thailand's advantage is that they're just a very close-knit group of players, and they found it quite easy to play games, especially that 2019 to 2021 period. Uh, they played a ton of qualifier games. They went on 20 match winning streak in T20 international cricket, leading into the T20 World Cup qualifiers in 2019, where the run was beaten by Bangladesh in the final. I'm pretty sure that's how it ended. But yeah, like they're just a close knit group of players, able to train a lot together, they play a lot together, and they really organize games to play. And we've talked about this before, but I firmly believe the only way you can get better at cricket is by playing cricket, and that's what Thailand was able to do. Especially during COVID as well, they managed to put on quite a few games in the lead up to the World Cup qualifier last year, and I feel like that's why they did so well at the World Cup qualifiers, because they had a lot of game experience going into it, especially 50 over game experience, which um, most of the teams they were up against didn't have. And the result was they did quite well at the ODI World Cup qualifier last year until Omicron came and everything went sour. And I think the problem for Thailand has been recently is that they just haven't been able to play games. They haven't played a single match in between. They didn't play a single match in between the end of the World Cup qualifier last year and the immediate lead up to the T20 World Cup qualifier last month. And I think that's partially why they did so poorly at the T20 World Cup qualifier. They lost to Zimbabwe thrice, they lost to Bangladesh quite heavily, and they were put in some tough positions by Papua New Guinea and the UAE in some of those games. So, you're talking about how rapidly Thailand have risen over the last 3-4 years. I think they've stalled quite a bit since last year. I think that's because they just haven't been able to play many matches. But they beat Pakistan. They had the perfect storm come together in that game. Everything went right, and all their best elements were on display. How they're able to grind it out while batting. Challenging disciplined bowling and very tight fielding. I think that's also one of their major advantages, that they're very good fielders. It's something they practice quite a bit. And again, fielding is another thing where I think especially it gets better if you play more. And if you're not playing as much, your fielding will suffer because fielding is something you have to be. I mean, it takes experience to be good at fielding, right? It's not something that you're just uber talented in from the off. And yeah, so they pulled off that win against Pakistan, which is quite important for them because it shows that they don't have to give up on whatever has been working for them in the past. It's there's talent is still there, and the win against Pakistan is very important to show that uh, they just got to stick with this, and this down period will pass.
And talking about the other side of it, Pakistan, I mean, they lost to Thailand, but they won against India. So I don't know what behavior is this, but it was interesting after all. And Pakistan is another interesting team because even if you go further back in the past, in the 50 over World Cup, they actually competed really well with the teams like South Africa, but then they also lost some games really one sided. So I think Pakistan, uh, you know, now obviously you are the one who can tell me better about it since you are more aware of that. But I mean, how is that you find someone like Nidadar who is really talented. There's Bisma Maroof, but what about everyone else? I mean, is it the same situation like the men's cricket where Punjab has the best facilities while others like Khyber or Sindh have relatively inferior quality, or is it something different with Pakistan women setup?
I mean, they use the same facilities as the men's teams, so yeah, the facilities in Punjab are definitely better than the facilities elsewhere. I feel like with Pakistan, it's just that there are there's some really talented players on there. There are some players on there which I don't want to be too mean, but they're not as good, right? So if the talented players don't show up, then you're in a lot of trouble. That is sort of what happened against Thailand, where the better players didn't show up on the day, and the not as good players weren't able to make up for it. And when the better players do show up, like they did against India, you can really swing a game. And going back to the 50 over World Cup last year, Pakistan lost to Bangladesh, didn't they? But they also challenged semi-finalist South Africa quite well, and that's because their better players showed up against South Africa and they didn't against Bangladesh. And the rest of the team wasn't able to make up for it against Bangladesh. So yeah, I think it also just shows a lot of volatility in the women's game, right? Because Thailand had lost to Bangladesh quite heavily in the opening game. I think they lost within like 11 overs. But then Pakistan, when they played Bangladesh, they beat Bangladesh very heavily as well, winning in 13 overs. And then when Pakistan plays Thailand, they lose to Thailand. And after that, they go on to beat India, right? So a lot of these teams, I think, barring UAE and especially Malaysia, the other five teams, I don't think they're that far apart from each other. On the day, any of them can probably beat any of them. India is relatively stronger. Yes, Thailand is relatively weaker. Yes, but if things go right for you on the day, any one of them can beat any of the others.
And moving on to the final team, that is Malaysia. Actually, you know, I often rate Sri Lanka as probably the second best team in Asia after India. But today they seem to struggle big time against Malaysia. I mean, I think they were 57 for 5 at one point. So, what is the situation with Malaysia? I mean, looks like they have some decent bowlers. Their batting is still kind of lagging behind, but their bowling seems to have covered some decent paces as of now.
Yeah, Malaysia's here because they finished second at the qualifier that the UAE won, and if I remember correctly, they lost to the UAE quite heavily both times at that qualifier. Yeah, like there is a pretty big gap between the UAE and the rest of the Asian teams below them, and we sort of see that with Malaysia's performances here. Now, I think their bowling is doing better because it's just a little easier for bowlers to do better on these tracks than batters. So, like Malaysia haven't been completely blown out with the ball yet, but I don't think that's because their bowlers are particularly amazing. I think it's more just it's harder for you're not going to get teams scoring 200, 300 against teams that are way better than on these types of tracks in the women's game. It's not to say that Malaysia's players are bad. They're just worse than the other six teams here. And yeah, that's really all you can say about Malaysia. I'm glad they're here, and I hope they continue to do well and keep coming back to these events. But they are definitely outmatched, and that's not a bad thing. Everyone's you got to start from somewhere, and for Malaysia, this is where the road begins. As long as they, keep coming back, keep coming at it, they'll get better, and they'll get closer to the other team.